upgraded, so that got better. But I know the one that comes out of Dorchester was not good, and the results from that were very bad. So I'm hoping they've got something in the pipeline to do with that. And likewise, all the other data points where the citizen science was collected. But it's interesting, actually, that we were highlighted in the national news as being one, even though we were only just sufficient, we were one of the 2 places were deemed actually sufficient. So just shows you how bad everywhere else is, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The potential is definitely there with the right work and investment, I think.
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Rawlins, Lee.
Yeah, I was just going to go back to the point that Sam was making about the new statutory requirement to produce a report within X of the start of the year on biodiversity. And I was just wondering what the headlines in that actually are and whether it's an action-oriented thing, have we improved habitats, have we enabled more movement corridors, have we dealt with things that will sustain and support that biodiversity, or what does it actually constitute, and what powers does it give us to do things? Is it simply a reporting thing?
I'll hand over to Dom.
Yeah, so biodiversity reporting was something that was introduced by the Environment Act. Now, the government's and DEFRA's guidance on biodiversity reporting has been a little vague. There is some guidance in terms of certain things that we have to include in the report. For example, because obviously the Environment Act introduced the statutory requirement for biodiversity net gain. And one of the things we know we have to report on is the number of biodiversity net gain units that have been delivered as a result of our planning activity since BNG became a statutory requirement. Beyond that, we have to say what our strategies and actions are, so what it is we've been doing. And as you'll know, all of our activity has been outlined in the Nature and Climate Action Plan. So we will be reporting back on our strategies and our policies that relate to biodiversity that are encapsulated within the Nature and Climate Action Plan. Beyond that, it is, as far as we can determine, more or less down to us what we choose to report on. So we will be, unsurprisingly, picking all of those things which you see in your monthly member updates and in the updates that Councillor James Lorry gives to these meetings and things reappearing within the report. There doesn't seem to be any requirement to submit the report to anybody. We simply have to publish it. So the plan is to write it, and as there is no new action proposed, it will simply be a summary of all of the things we've been doing and what our policies are over the last period of time since the Environment Act was introduced, and it will be up on our website by the 31st of March 2026.
What gets measured gets done. When we talk about houses, we specify the scores on the doors on frequent intervals. It seems that it's not necessarily quite the same on biodiversity. Tom, I was just interested that obviously all the push for housing, we're now looking at things like grey belt suggestions and developing parts of grey belts. Are we looking at that as an area where it's not designated grey belt and isn't built over? As to whether we can actually get funds to make improvements in other areas so that the totality of the green belt is not as diminished as it might be if there's simply lumps built over without any enhancement elsewhere.
I think the question about grey belt is something that my colleagues in the planning policy team will be considering within the context of the Joint Local Plan and other planning policy documents. In terms of whether we can do something positive within those other areas, I think going back to the point that we made earlier about the adoption of the local nature recovery strategy for Oxfordshire, a lot of our activity is going to be, in terms of nature recovery anyway, is going to be focused in those areas. We have to sort of prioritise where we spend our time and resources, and it's likely to be over the next few years going forward. We will be doing that, and there will be an expectation from government that we should be prioritising action within that LNRS recovery area.
Okay, thank you.
Right. I think if that's everything for Councillor James Lorry and that area, I think some good points made there. And one of the ones that's made on the chat was, what's the value of testing if sewage upgrading not planned? I think the short answer to that is sorry, you have your hand up, Ali. So shall I let you ask that? Councillor Gordon-Creed. Yep. You're on mute, I think.
No, that one is that doesn't have to be answered. Thanks. No, I was more going to feed in. I don't know if I know you did, Andrew. You kindly replied, but I don't know if anyone else saw my suggestions with regards to creating more of the wildlife corridor element, which would tie into what Lee was talking about. And also what Dom said, you know, that I think there really is more we can do that we're not doing with regards to the whole grey belt, diminishing of green belt, enhancing biodiversity, and challenging the BNG story, shall we say?
Yeah. I thought you made some excellent points in there, and I'd like to bring that up in any other business at the end, if that's okay. And it would probably be a good point to provide some focus for future meetings as well. Excuse me. Right. Well, if we've dealt with that, thank you again, Councillor James Loy. Sam, thank you very much for providing that update. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the meeting if you like, and obviously welcome your input as well. Now I've got a couple of updates from our officers. The first is from Jessie Freeth, providing an update on our heat network proposals and how that links in with the national proposals and zoning plans and what have you. So, Jessie, this is where you've definitely got the expertise, and I'm listening and learning. So, thank you.
I don't know about that, but I'll give it my best shot. So yeah, I'm going to talk a bit about heat networks and give a bit of an update on policy development that's happening at central government, and then I'll talk briefly about how that links to some local opportunities we're currently exploring. I'm sorry if anyone is already quite familiar with heat networks and already knows some of this, but I'll go through it quite quickly. So a heat network is also known as district heating scheme, and it's basically when heat is distributed from a central source and then distributed to multiple different buildings. The heat source for a heat network can be a range of different things. It doesn't actually necessarily have to be low carbon, so there are examples of gas heat networks. However, for our purposes, we are looking at it as an opportunity to decarbonise heating systems and reach net zero. So you can have heat networks that use sort of really large-scale air source heat pumps or water source heat pumps. And then you can also have heat networks that reuse waste heat from things like energy to waste plants, sewage treatment plants, industrial processes, and data centres. So they are an alternative low carbon way of heating homes and businesses rather than each individual building having its own heat pump, for example. We don't currently have any operational heat networks in South Oxfordshire, but as you will hear a bit later on in the local area energy planning item in the agenda, heat network deployment is estimated to deliver around 10% of our heat in Oxfordshire by 2050, i.e. about 10% of heat will be supplied by heat networks, or could be supplied by heat networks, maybe I should say. In terms of national government policy on heat networks, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero is supporting heat network development through their heat network zoning programme. How many times am I going to say the word heat network in this? Sorry about that. They are designating zones where heat networks are expected to offer the lowest cost solution for decarbonising heat. So if an area is designated as a heat network zone, the idea is that certain types of buildings, for example, all new buildings or all buildings that are over a certain size, would have to connect to a heat network. And also if there's a particular source of heat that exists in an area, that would also be required to supply a heat network, all within a prescribed time frame. This is all theoretical at the moment. This isn't actually policy yet, but this is the kind of policy ideas that they're coming up with and moving towards, and piloting in various cities across England. So DESNZ are developing this methodology for firstly identifying the zones, and they have issued to us the sort of mapping outputs for that. They are just draft at the moment, and there is going to be a refinement process where local stakeholders, including local authorities, will be able to comment on where they have proposed the zones would be. We don't yet know the detail of this process, so I can't give really any more information than that at this point, but it's something that we are sort of keeping a close eye on and engaging with the department on. They're also going to establish a governance process. They will have central government as a heat network zoning authority, and then they will also assign local organisations as what they're calling zoning coordinators. This is likely to be teams within local government, probably at the mayoral strategic authority level once we have gone through LGR. There is more information on the government website, and I can put a link in the chat when I finished, because it's quite interesting if you're interested in this sort of thing. So I've just got one slide which I'm just going to share. I've actually nicked this from the local area energy planning presentation that Heather and I are doing later, so ignore this text for now, but look at this map here. So this is the sort of draft output of the national zoning model for South Oxfordshire and Vale of White Horse. The orange shape files indicate where they are proposing heat network zones. Again, this is a draft, none of this is confirmed yet, and we haven't had any way of inputting into this yet. But each of these zones has a particular existing heat source associated with it. The model currently only considers existing heat sources, so it doesn't think about future heat sources. But this brings me on to some areas that we're currently looking at. So if you look at Didcot here, there are some heat network zones that are including here as well. This is the one we're actually interested in, on the border between South and Vale. There are some zones identified in this area, and we also know that there are a number of data centre proposals in the area which are going to produce a hell of a lot of waste heat, which is not currently taken into account in the zoning model. So with the fact that this national zoning model has already identified the area as being potentially suitable for a heat network, for information, the heat sources they are considering here are the existing power station and sewage treatment works. We also know that there is going to be some data centres that produce waste heat. Together, this is quite a potentially exciting opportunity for a low carbon heat network development. So we are looking to undertake a feasibility study to consider potentially merging and expanding these proposed heat network zones. The study is going to look at things like calculating the amount of heat that is expected to be available, mapping out which buildings could connect to it, so buildings and developments existing and new, doing an initial assessment of what type of heat network would be most suitable, and doing some very high level concept designs and layouts, and then assessing viability, providing estimates of capital costs and recommendations for next steps. That's quite a simplified version of what it will cover, but those are kind of the headlines. And throughout that process, we will engage with key stakeholders, including the data centre developers, nearby businesses and housing developers. And we're already having some of those conversations. This site, the feasibility study is probably going to be technically led by Vale of White Horse District Council because the sites are there, but obviously because it's on the border with South Oxfordshire, it's very of significant interest in South as well. So we have applied for funding from the government to their heat network delivery unit to undertake this study. We're expecting to hear the outcome of this very shortly and are very hopeful that it will be successful. So watch this space on that front. The other thing that we're working on quickly, I'll talk through, is a similar study for Culham. So you'll see Culham isn't identified on this map at all. And that's because there isn't an existing heat source there. However, we know that it's been designated as the first AI growth zone by the UK government. And as part of that, they are proposing a 100 megawatt data centre in the sort of next couple of years, and then with aspirations for much more than that, up to 500 megawatts in the longer term. And there might also be other opportunities associated with the adjacent employment site that's allocated in the local plan. So we're also going to be doing a study for this site, which will cover all the same things that I just talked about for the Didcot one. And in addition, it will also provide some information that's needed for the development of the local development order, which is being worked on by colleagues in the planning team. So we are slightly further ahead on this one, and a procurement exercise for consultants to do this is currently live. The deadline for this is the 6th of January, and I can also post a link to the procurement portal if anyone is interested to have a look at the tender. I think importantly for both of these sites, there's potential for the council to require data centre developers to provide waste heat for a future heat network through planning obligations. And this is the main reason that we're conducting these studies now. We would need to take advantage of the live planning applications in order to capture that opportunity. And this is only possible prior to the planning applications being determined. So we're really trying to move these forward as quickly as we can. Both the projects are being led by the climate team, but we're working very closely with colleagues in planning, economic development, and the garden communities team as well. All being well, we hope to be in a position to get going with both of these studies around March next year, and then finalise them over the summer. They expect to take about 4 to 6 months each. That's kind of our short-term plan. Longer term, we know that local government reorganisation is going to make the next steps after that quite challenging. But we aim to use the information that we gather to inform the planning decisions. And then in the longer term, these are potentially very exciting, but very significant infrastructure projects. They have a huge potential to decarbonise heating for lots of homes and buildings. We are in the very early stages, though, but it is quite exciting. So I'll stop talking there and happy to try and answer any questions. Let me stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. That was really interesting, and I'm sort of my brain's reeling at the possibilities. It's there's loads in there, and not just for heating homes, but co-locating industries and keeping the options open. I think in the design, isn't it, so that nothing is sterilized for the future, because current cooling options can then go to heating options and what have you. Quite a few questions, unsurprisingly, because it's a very interesting one. Thank you. First off, Councillor Rawlins, Lee.
Yeah, part of my thing was that the map didn't reflect the data centres and the AI, but you made that point, Jessie, and covered it very well. But there's a sort of linkage in a number of ways here, isn't there? Because if I understand it correctly, the heat doesn't travel very far, so it necessarily has to be fairly local, I think.
It does. We did a little bit of pre-market engagement for the Culham tender, and we were surprised actually at how potentially far it could travel. There was some indication that you could transport heat for up to 10 to 15 kilometers, but obviously that is more expensive. So
yes, you need to build a big insulated pipe or something. Yes.
Yeah, logistically a nightmare, and but it's there's a potential there because of the quantity of heat.
And presumably this all needs to link into the local area energy plan, and a lot of these things are going to be taking electricity. Absent I don't know, mini nuclear reactors over the district or something. We're going to be looking at that. And yeah, it's all that data center and energy supply is all going to have to tie in together, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you, Lee. Councillor Gordon-Creed, Ali.
Oh, am I next? Thank you.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Have I made a mistake there? It might be James Barlow, actually. Councillor
I think
Barlow.
it's James. Yeah.
My apologies, James.
It really doesn't matter. Thank you. Do you want to go, Ali, or shall I? No? Okay, I'll go then. Jesse, thanks very much. I was interested in you identified a heat source or a group of users in Wallingford, and I was curious, being that that's obviously where I'm based. I wondered what that was. I could have a guess, but I was just curious.
I actually don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to go into the GIS and have a look at what their heat source is. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that right now, but I can have a look afterwards and get back to you.
Okay, and that ties in. That's fine. It ties in with a broader question, I guess, across the area. Just, you mentioned water source heat pumps. Some of those yellow dots on the map do appear to line up with perhaps things by the Thames. I just wonder if you could comment on that, please.
No, I think you're right, and I'm sure that is the source that is linked to in this kind of model. The model definitely includes water source opportunities, so that is likely to be those. I just need to check.
Okay. Now, it'd be really helpful to know, because that's something we've been talking about for a while. Yeah. So if that's coming on, that's really exciting, because I know there are some small versions of water source heat pumps already working off the Thames in this area. So I'm sure they'd be happy to talk to you if appropriate.
Thanks.
Councillor Gordon-Creed, your hand is down because you've spoken, but I suspect you still have a question.
Well, this may be the stupidest question in the world, but what energy are the data centers running on?
So they use electricity to run, and they are very energy hungry in that respect. But electricity, in theory, can be net zero. So they are using grid connection, and there is also some new stuff around the AI growth zone in Culham about them getting kind of priority access to the grid and things like that. So that's all things that we're looking at in the local area energy plan, which we'll talk about in a bit.
So further on with that, then, is there any strategic vision for the data centers themselves to be more sustainable, to run on alternative energy sources?
I mean, that's kind of a planning matter, and it would depend on the kind of willingness of the applicant as well. I don't know what our planning policies are in terms of requiring that, particularly before without the joint local plan. So yeah, that sort of depends on the willingness of the applicant. But in theory, they could have a lot of on-site renewable generation, for example. You'd expect the roofs to be covered in solar, etc., things like that.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor Barley's still got a hand raised. Is that legacy hand, as they say?
Legacy hand, yeah. Sorry, I thought it was coming down.
No worries. Thank you. Just checking. Councillor Norman, James.
Yes. Hello. Yes, Jesse, you said there were no district heat networks in South Oxfordshire. Actually, I can tell you that that's wrong, because I used to run a company called Oxford Renewables, and we put in quite a lot of district heat networks in South Oxfordshire. Okay. But they are small scale. They were small scale. We were a biomass company for about 15 years, and I can point you to some if you would like some examples. So, for example, Braziers Park has a district heat network, and so does the Goring Heath Arms Houses, for example. We put in both of those. So I think they're small compared to what you're talking about, but they were true district heat networks. In both cases there, they delivered to 5 different properties, for example, approximately. And there were others as well. So they do exist. We sank as a company because the government didn't continue to support biomass. So that has been lost as a heat source, sadly, which is a shame, because I came into this from the woodland management direction, and I know that there is a vast unused resource in British woodlands, a third of which are not managed at all, and some of the rest of which are not managed to any great extent. However, my question was, which I don't know the answer to, is what is the grade of heat produced by data centers? People talk a lot about this waste heat. A huge amount depends on what the grade of heat is as to how useful it is.
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to find out. And I think that probably is something that we would actually find out through the studies in terms of the kind of the value and the volume of the heat. It depends on, well, I guess it probably depends on all sorts of things, but I'm afraid I can't answer that right now. I would be very interested if you have any information about the existing heat networks, if you could share them. Like they didn't appear, we did a lot of evidence base of data gathering and for our local area energy plan evidence base, and those didn't come up. So I'd be.
I'm not sure how they would have.
Anything more.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I'd be very happy to. I can produce a sort of list of them.
Great.
In South Oxfordshire, and I'm not sure how they would have shown up, in what kind of sort of data analysis they would have shown up. I mean, they weren't. I mean, they were getting renewable heat incentives, so they'd be on a public record there. Because of the way the RHI worked, if you provided heat to more than one building, it became a non-domestic RHI. So those are a matter of public record, so they should be on, and both of those that I mentioned, for example, are still claiming renewable heat incentive, so they would appear on some public database. But in any case, I can provide a list of a few sort of obvious ones. And as just a very brief comment on this distance, I mean, so I do, although I wasn't the engineer and I don't have any engineering background, I was involved in a lot of these. Mostly in a sort of logistics and hands-on capacity, but you know, they are very, very expensive. There's a lot of heavy marketing by district heat network companies now, particularly one in particular whose name escapes me. But these are very, very expensive. The insulated pipework is extremely expensive, and of course you're crossing lots of other services and so on. I mean, all trenching and installing of underground heat networks is very expensive. And when you suggest 10 to 15 kilometers, I mean, the heat losses over that are pretty enormous.
Yeah, I think that's probably unrealistic. Like, that was just the information that we got provided by a company, but
yeah, I'm
not pinning any hopes on that, to be honest.
Yeah, realistically, my gut feeling from years of working in this, without actually being, I wasn't the design engineer, but my gut feeling is that really over a kilometre becomes unfeasible for two reasons. One is the heat losses, but the other is the energy used for pumping. So we put in quite a lot of these to, for example, large country houses, where again they had, for example, let's say a lodge house or a caretaker's house or a gardener's house or something, and simply by putting it to two houses they were able to get this, at the time, fantastic renewable heat incentive. Many of those people continued.
So we've talked a few times before at CEEAC meetings about the local area energy plan. So today, Heather and I are just going to give a short update on the recent project progress and initial findings and information that's coming out of all this work that we're doing. And we're also going to have a bit of discussion at the end. We're currently in the throes of a lot of different stakeholders discussions with lots of comments and ideas being thrown into the mix to be included in our South Oxfordshire local area energy plan. So we wanted to use the session today as a bit of a sounding board, or to sense check some ideas that are coming out. and to answer some particular questions. So we'll do a little presentation, and then we've got some questions at the end. So as a reminder, apologies for those who've heard this before, a local area energy plan, or LEAP as we call them, is a strategic framework from how we get from the current energy system that we have at the moment to a net zero energy system. So it combines a lot of technical analysis and detailed modelling, data collection with stakeholder engagement to produce a detailed plan for decarbonising energy use, so electricity, heat, transport, buildings, agriculture, everything like that. Through the LEAP, we are aiming to develop a clear understanding of the best route to achieving net zero while also supporting growth in the district. The LEAP will also touch on sort of equitable energy transition that benefits all stakeholders, and will continue to build our kind of energy planning capacity. So as a team, we're kind of learning a lot about this topic, and we're trying to sort of build those in-house skills that we have to sort of continue to deliver this work over the longer term. The OxLEAP programme is what it's called. We are working with the other Oxfordshire councils on this, and it's being sort of project managed by the county council. It is funded by the Oxfordshire Joint Leaders Committee, which was called the Future Oxfordshire Partnership before, and we're working with consultants Arup and Global City Futures. So on the slide, there's a little kind of progress diagram, and the project is split into 3 phases. The first phase was the sort of building the picture phase, gathering the baseline data on the current energy system as it stands at the moment, and modelling what is possible. And this was all done at a county level. Then phase 2 is when we create our district level tailored energy plans and identify the priorities that we want to focus on. And then the phase 3 is the making it happen phase. This is how we build our capacity and capabilities, creating sort of a function within the local authorities to be able to continue this work in the longer term. So where we're at now, we have completed phase 1, and the main deliverables were sort of the baseline and the modelling, which Heather is going to talk about in a minute. And we've now moved into phase 2, which focuses on developing the plans for each district. We are kind of at the early stages of that right now, and the final plan is due for delivery in April next year. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement that's going on right now. I'm going to talk a bit more about that at the end, so I won't touch on that now. But the other thing to say is phase 3 is not necessarily, it starts before the end of phase 2, if that makes sense. So we're already thinking about that and sort of scoping out what we need to do to make sure that we can actually deliver the local area energy plans. So I'm going to hand over to Heather now. I'll keep the slides up, Heather, so just let me know when you want me to move on.
Great, thanks so much, Jessie, and good evening, everybody. So I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking about the energy modelling. As you'll have seen from the last slide, the modelling was a key output from phase 1, and that was an Oxfordshire county-wide activity. So most of the data we have going into phase 2 is county-wide. So please, moving on, Jessie. So first of all, to talk about how the modelling was approached, how the modelling took place. It was basically in 3 stages. So Arup, our consultants, first of all, they took the targets that the county had set previously. So we'd done work on the Pathways to Zero Carbon Oxfordshire, the PASCO, and the Oxfordshire Net Zero Route Map and Action Plan. Sorry, quite a long acronym. And that had information on the best assumptions we had on future demand, future supply of energy, and growth projections for the future, so that Arup took this data and put it into their model for building and transport sectors. They then were able to disaggregate that to primary substation level. So this is a level in the grid infrastructure, and in South Oxfordshire we have 16 primary substations. So you're talking 4 or 5 communities, 4 or 5 villages within a primary substation. So they looked at any constraints they had in their model in individual substations. So that could be, for example, they had renewable energy maps, and it might show certain areas where solar wasn't possible. So they wouldn't have that as a possible generation opportunity in that area. But in the main, they were able to disaggregate all the activities in the first step to primary substation level. And then they looked at how we're going to get from now to 2050. And so it could have been a linear progression, or it could have been a different curve. And that would really depend on their knowledge about behavior patterns, about when technologies were going to become available, or other interim milestones that we had in the county or we knew about because they were government policy. So all that was thrown into the mix, and Arup completed their modelling. Thanks, Jessie. So this is very much the headline chart that has so far come out of their modelling, and it takes us from now to our target in 2050. And Arup modelled 2 scenarios in their work. The first one, business as usual, and that one really, the main emission reductions are just from the grid. So the national grid continuing to decarbonise electricity, and that only gives us 16%. So not a great result. Obviously, we do have lots of work to do. The other scenario they chose was really the most ambitious one that we had in the Pathways to Zero Carbon Oxfordshire, the Oxfordshire leading the way scenario. And you'll see on the bottom right there, they were able to model emissions reductions of 98% by 2050. And you'll see the different elements there that make up the trajectory. So electricity isn't giant at the moment and getting small quite quickly. Transport very much linked to the government's targets for 2040 of a major transition to electric vehicles. So transport really dropping down to almost zero by 2040. And then obviously the big chunk in the middle of the chart is heating, which remains a challenge for quite a long time. Great, thanks, Jessie. So, went to. I'm happy to take a question.
Apologies. Councillor Rawlins, Lee, you've got a question? Ask it now or wait?
I was speaking to something else. Yes, I've popped the microphone in it now. Yeah, I was thinking, obviously that showed the carbon change, but implied in that is a big increase in the use of electricity. And you were saying that we would have 16 sort of sub-power points, and I guess that's about 10,000 people per point. But that must change dramatically as people come away from gas and heating, as this graph shows from a carbon perspective. That must mean an immense increase probably in electricity. Obviously, we hope to see some insulation benefits as well, but it's going to be a pretty big increase in electricity from those type sources. And then, of course, we've got all of the other things like the data centers and the AI and increasing digital usage. It
certainly is. If you want to hold that point, and when we've gone through all the other slides, if you have a specific question, then please do go ahead. But certainly this is emissions, and obviously it's the emissions for every unit of electricity that are considered to be marginal in the future. So it can accommodate the increase in demand for electricity. And there are other issues that we're going to come on to about the grid reinforcement requirements, as you know.
Okay.
Great. So following the discussions between the project team, which is made up of representatives of all the councils across Oxfordshire, and Arup, the consultants, we identified 8 key themes that we were going to focus on. And these have very much been the themes that we've based our stakeholder engagement on and are likely to form the structure of our local area energy plan. So I don't think there'll be any surprises in these themes. Obviously, buildings, we decided to group together homes and small businesses because they seem to have similar challenges, whereas science, commercial and industrial, very site-specific issues and needs in our area come up there. Public buildings is another area, transport you'd expect, and we really didn't want agriculture to be missed out of the discussions. Then we also have likely projects focusing on energy infrastructure, heat networks, and renewable electricity generation. So Arup have presented to previous events in recent weeks, stakeholder events that we've had, data and charts on all these. So I've just picked out for us tonight, because we wanted to keep this reasonably brief, a few highlights, but there is more data available should you wish to see it in the future. So I'm just going to highlight some of the information that Arup have shared with us on the next few slides. So the first one, homes and businesses, and all the charts here are actually South and Vale. So if you kindly look to the right-hand side of each of the graphs, the map here shows the energy performance certificate ratings for homes across the district and the average for different areas. And you can see South Oxfordshire, most of it is average D, so we still have a way to go there. But helpfully, this chart also highlights areas where the ratings are worse. So we can really look to focus activity on those areas if we wish to. So you'll see on the left-hand side, all the charts have got a little box with some information about the current position and the box below with some information about the changes needed. So under the current position, you'll see that 20% of properties in South are not using gas boilers. Obviously, some of them could be eco homes, but a very large number are probably using expensive fuels. And again, that's an opportunity for us, as we've known for quite a few years, just to focus in these areas. And you'll also see that 58% of heat demand reduction in homes is required. So it's not just a question of decarbonising, but also retrofit is a very important element and will be a very important element in our future activities. Thanks, Jessie. So transport, again, probably no surprises here. We've still got only 2% of vehicles with a fuel type of battery electric. So again, a long way to go in improving our performance there. And one of the assumptions in the model is that we will reduce personal vehicle miles by 35%. So the model has all personal vehicles becoming electric. But even then, that isn't sufficient for the net zero. We also need to be looking at changing our behaviours for active travel or sharing or public transport options. Great. So energy infrastructure, again, here's a map that is very interesting to look at the detail. And this is about grid capacity. And obviously, it's a very important topic and part of the local area energy plan. And we can see that in South Oxfordshire, there's some pretty extensive red areas there. And we'll be working very closely with the distribution network operators to look at the projects that are coming forward, and if they're in those areas, how we can tackle the infrastructure issues and what investments they'll be looking to take forward. So for anyone that doesn't know, we have 2 distribution network operators in South Oxfordshire, the main one being SSEN, but we also have UK Power Networks, and they're on the chart as a sort of cross-hatched area in the top right in the Tame area. Great, next one. So this one I feel like, heat networks. This one I feel like jumping. There we go. I feel like you usurped me here, Jessie. Anything I say will be a fraction of what you've already said. So again, I was just going to incorrectly point out that there were no operational heat networks in South Oxfordshire. Very interesting to get the new information tonight and to flag up on the map the areas that the government have identified. But obviously Jessie has gone through that in a lot of detail, so I think we can move on. So this is my final slide, actually, and there's a lot of information on this very interesting map. So I'll try and go through some of the highlights for you. So there are dots on the map for existing solar farms. They're in orange, and the size of the dot is equivalent to the size of the solar farm. And then also planned capacity is in the kind of orange with a black ring around it. And again, so you can see that across both South and Vale, if you're interested in quite large solar farms in the pipeline. But at the same time on this map are the modelling results from Arup of the suitability for ground-mounted PV and wind. So the ground-mounted PV is in green. So you'll see in South there are some areas with high suitability for solar PV. And you'll also see it says on the chart, onshore wind, low suitability. So this doesn't mean it's bad, it just means it's not high. So it's showing areas where wind is suitable, but it would be more attractive if the wind speeds were higher, but it's still something to be considered. So one of the interesting findings from the modelling, which we weren't necessarily expecting, is that the model suggests theoretically and technically, as you'll see in the bottom, that 31% of capacity for renewables in South Oxfordshire area could be wind energy in the net zero future. And some of the reasoning that Arup have given us behind this is, firstly, that obviously wind is very complementary to solar because of its generating at different times of year, but also for any given unit of capacity, wind produces more energy than solar. So it's more efficient per unit, per megawatt of installation. So, and we are going to be having a discussion about this as one of our questions, because obviously it is a change from the current distribution of energy that we have in the districts. But that's really my whistle-stop tour of the modelling results. And we could pause here if we have a couple of questions.
Yeah, that would probably be a good idea.
Unmute, shall I? That's always better. Ali, Councillor Gordon-Creed.
Hi, thank you. That was really fascinating. In the last point you just made, looking at that chart, which I can't see anymore on the last slide, South has 39% capacity for rooftop PV, which you didn't bring up. Am I getting the numbers wrong here in terms of what the values mean? But I know.
You're absolutely not. I could have pointed that out as well. So we've also talked about that in our group and about how that does seem high. So the model is assuming that every roof that is technically possible to have solar will have solar. And we know that there are many logistical and practical issues about that. So in our action planning, in the LEAP, we will be taking account of the real world. And it may be that we are not recommending that. But so at the moment, this is the technical information that's come out of the model for us to consider and take expert advice on.
Can I just kind of add to that or query or challenge, however you take it? So I was interested in how you're going to include the agriculture in this LEAP. And I wondered, because CPRE has been banging on for years about rooftop solar on farming buildings, etc., etc. And my challenge is it less attractive because of the government's mandate on big infrastructure things, which wind would be more of a thing in their terms than it would adding solar to existing roofs in terms of their economic bottom line? And do we have to obey that is the question.
So I think Jessie's going to be asking some questions about agriculture, and maybe we could capture everyone's thoughts about agriculture at that point. Would you mind holding that point and making it again shortly? And then we'd love to gather all the comments on agriculture at the same time, because we realise that we haven't done much in this area. It's very much an opportunity for the future.
Thanks.
Great. We have Councillor Rawlins. Lee.
Yeah, a couple of points. On the map, I'm seeing that there's a jet fusion flywheel. I assume we're not placing many bets on that as a material generator in the next 30 years. But it would be interesting to see. You mentioned the 16 sort of nodes in South Oxfordshire before, and I guess there's a bunch of nodes in Vale as well. And it would be interesting to look at each one of those and what sources we're expecting to come into them, what sources we're expecting to go out from them, and some sort of pattern by time, so that we can then figure out what probably, in simple terms, goes with those nodes, i.e. a hulking great battery that will help to smooth out all of those things locally and minimize to a reasonable degree the amount of power transmission lines we need to make the whole damn thing function, which I kind of thought was one of the core directions that the LEAP was going in, to kind of plan out how the whole network would be. I don't know if I've missed something, but the LEAP or the modelling up to date shows that we will be using renewable energy from Oxfordshire up to a certain point, and the rest will be imported through the network. You're right, I can't remember off the top of my head the split there, but I think we do not currently, Jessie and I don't currently have any charts or data on the individual primary substation areas. That hasn't yet been shared with us. When, Jessie, please correct me if I'm wrong, but when we get the draft LEAP report, we should have some data then that does have this geographical split. And is there going to be an opportunity to share that with councillors? I'm now trying to remember.
I'm not sure, we'd have to check that.
Yeah. So that's a little bit more detailed than we're working on right now, unfortunately.
I'm just really flagging up that I think batteries will be a really important point of balancing and limiting the extent of shipping stuff around, which we know loses lots of power on the way by. So batteries do too, I admit, but yeah, I think that's how it's going to have to look, in my view.
So it's come back on camera. Great. Councillor Barlow.
Thanks, Andrew.
James,
yeah, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Jessie, for this. I'm really glad that you talked about demand side reduction being tackled at the same time, because it seems absolutely futile to do this without that. And it seems that when you talked about, I think you said 58% of heat demand reduction needs to happen in houses. I wondered how kind of likelihoods behind these assumptions are taken into account, because if I think about what's just happened with the Westminster Labour government, who's just stepped away from what was absolutely a far from perfect Eco4 kind of system for home energy improvements, but there's no replacement put in place, and so the incentive for the majority of homeowners now is very minimal. I wonder what assumptions are in this when you showed those lovely glide paths to 98% things reduction. And when it comes to demand side reductions such as that, and the fact that I think you said miles need to go down by 30%, but we also need to massively increase active travel. And again, if I think about, say, the local cycle and walking infrastructure plans at county, there's just no funding for this. So I'm curious about whether you put some kind of likelihood of achieving these things. That's my first question.
So on the housing, I'm going to defer to Jessie because she's done more work on that area.
So I think, as Heather sort of said earlier, the kind of likelihood bit, is this the question? I can't quite remember. Sure. Is something that's going to come about more as we develop our own LEAP. So this is like ideal scenario modelling, and then we need to be a bit more pragmatic as we develop our own local area energy plan for our district and think more about realism at that point. Which is where we're at.
You saying something about that now, Jessie? Sorry. Yeah.
It's all right.
I'm not sure I have anything to add on transport. Obviously, we haven't done, as a district, so many projects in that area up to date.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks for the straightforwardness. And then Lee did mention the fusion flywheel. It seems to me, though, it's got quite a big installed capacity assumption there. Is that been taken into account? Because it looks like it's at either 30 to 40 or 40 to 50 installed megawatts. And to Lee's point, I think it's very unlikely to be online in the next 30 years. When I was 18, I went for an interview there and was told that I should go and work there. You know,
Yeah.
am I misreading?
Can I correct on the fusion flywheel? It's not a future capacity, it's a past one, and it was there to iron out the humps in electricity supply for jet, which is now being decommissioned.
Right.
So as far as I'm aware, it's kind of a legacy thing, and maybe kept as an interesting museum piece, but I don't think it has a practical application for the future. And certainly, I believe that UKEA are looking at a battery facility rather than that in the future, which would again link into possible future housing developments with solar and what have you. So it's a very interesting thing, but it's not saying fusion energy will provide in the future there.
But it's a really helpful point. Thank you, and we will certainly check back with Arup and make sure that they have a realistic closure date. In their model.
At the moment, it suggests it's one of our main energy providers, doesn't it? So, in terms of if that scale is shown in terms of the generation capacity, and forgive me if I'm reading that wrong. And then my last question relating to this map, which is similar to the question we asked about the heat networks. There's nothing in here at all in terms of water source heat pumps. And given that they could be really powerful, as we were talking about in heat networks, I'm just curious that they're not in this. Are they outside the scope of this study? And if so, I wonder why.
So I don't think they would be on this map, because this map is about renewable energy technologies. Oh,
it's about electricity, not heat. So I don't think they'd be on this map.
Oh, all right. It's just, it says energy, doesn't it? So,
but we are definitely considering water source heat pumps, but they probably come under the decarbonising heat section. Sorry, that's probably a bit misleading of the text.
We haven't been presented with a specific map showing different types of heat pumps in different locations. That's not something that has been shared.
Okay, thank you.
Right, James. Sorry, Norman. James Norman.
Is that me? Okay.
That's you. Yes, please.
Yes. Fusion, nuclear fusion, always 10 years away. Just making the joke that everybody always makes. So yes, it's 10 years away, Lee. But 10 years from now, it'll still be 10 years away. So,
at least. Although
I was just going
to be quite fair to UKEA, they have a company now, UK IFS, Industrial Fusion Solutions, who is developing a prototype commercial fusion reactor in Nottinghamshire. So that 10 years, I suspect, is going to shrink quite rapidly. And also it's being pursued around the world. So there is quite a race on for that hasn't quite been there in the past. So watch this space. Hopefully it will happen.
That's very exciting. I wasn't aware of that. I mean, we seem to be struggling with fission nuclear energy, let alone fusion, you know, with the disasters of Sizewell and so on. Anyway, that wasn't what I was talking about. Just to reiterate, just to follow up on Ali's point about PV, there is a vast acreage of farm building roofs, and I simply cannot understand, given the huge grants that were available under the feed-in tariff and subsidies, I simply cannot understand why every farm roof in the country hasn't got PV all over it. And personally, I would like to see not a single acre of ground-based PV until every single roof is covered. That is my personal view. And there is a vast acreage that hasn't been covered. And if you say, why haven't my farm roofs been covered? The answer is, well, I'm a tenant and I was refused permission by the landlord to do it. However, I'm moving on to Hardwick Estate, where I farm, is shortly to become a community-owned estate. And we have a group called Hardwick Community Energy, and that got a large grant to do a feasibility study on energy within the estate. So 2 points. One is about PV. The people who carried out this feasibility study were called CEEAC, and they repeatedly came back with ground-based PV every time. And every time we said to them, well, have you considered roof-based? Because there's 1/4 acre of roofs here. And they said, oh, yes, we'll get back to that. And they never did. So they ended up with their plan, which had cost grant funded £30,000 with no interest at all in roof-based PV. It was entirely ground-based PV. I don't know why that was. So they missed the opportunity there. The second one is about wind, which I'm very interested in and know almost nothing about. But because we are on this scarp face, so we're sort of near, just along from Whitchurch-on-Thames, there is actually quite a good wind resource here. And this is something that I'm extremely keen to follow up on. It'll be a fascinating planning application because we're in the national landscape and, you know, this thing will be at least 30 meters high and so on, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. The immediate difficulty is that because we've had years of onshore wind being blocked by the government, the last government, there are no companies doing it. So you can't even get feasibilities, you can't even get costings, you can't get quotes, you can't get anything at all because there's nobody out there doing it. So that's going to take quite some time to begin to generate. I'm hoping that we will be the first onshore wind of this new generation in South Oxfordshire. But I don't know when that's going to happen because we can't find anyone to quote for it. So, that's where we are with onshore wind. I think it's going to be a long lead in time because there isn't the industry capacity. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Cooper, Sue.
Thank you. Just a comment on what's been said, actually. I too was concerned about the number of farm building roofs without solar panels on them. And I did have quite a long conversation with Philip Chamberlain, who's a big local farmer. Well, his sons are now. And he said the big problem with farm buildings is that most of them are not strong enough to carry the weight of solar panels. He said that nearly all new farm buildings ought to or are getting solar panels on them, but existing ones, and you can picture that. Actually, I can envisage lots of almost like corrugated iron roofs that just haven't got the strength in their supports to take the weight. And on wind power, I mean, it might be that there are some areas on the edge of the Chilterns and indeed probably the North Wessex Downs where there might be enough wind. Generally speaking, wind is very much more efficient or more available around the coast in this country. And Oxfordshire in particular, being almost as far as you can get from the coast, isn't generally recognised. And where it is, I mean, you've hit the nail on the head, it's the national landscape areas. So, yeah, getting that through planning, I wish you the best of luck. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, good point. And I would be doing my ecological colleagues a disservice if I didn't mention bats and barometric trauma, or barotrauma as it's known, which is something they're very prone to with onshore wind turbines. So a complex area and one to go carefully on, I think. But yeah, we'll certainly, one of the things that's certainly very clear is with the transition to a low carbon energy grid, we are going to see a lot more trade-offs and decisions like that having to be made. Right.
Shall I? We haven't quite finished. Sorry.
No, I was going to say I don't think
Okay.
you finished yet. I was just checking there's no more hands, but I'll let you
Okay,
carry
perfect. So we'll pick up some of those comments, I think, in a minute, because I think some of that will be really helpful for our discussion. But just to kind of set the scene slightly. So last month we had our South Oxfordshire Action Planning Workshop. This was sort of a brainstorming session where attendees were asked to propose ideas to be included in our local area energy plan. It was a very successful session. We had around 40 people come along from a wide range of different local organisations, all who had a sort of particular stake or interest in the district. And collectively, they suggested over 100 action ideas. So we now have quite a lot of work to go to kind of whittle it down slightly and refine. that long list, and we're working with the consultants to do that. But we thought today we would just use the next few minutes just to propose a few questions that we would appreciate your thoughts on, that we will then consider as we rationalise and refine the ideas that we've received. I think some of them are quite linked to what we were just the comments that we just had. So possibly there's some more thoughts, and that's great. And if not, don't worry. I've grouped the questions together. There's 3 slides, so I thought it would work best if I quickly introduce each set of questions, and then we can have a short discussion and then move on to the next set. So yeah, keen to hear your thoughts. So the first one is around renewable energy and energy infrastructure. So we currently have no wind turbines in South Oxfordshire, I believe. The LEAP isn't going to propose any sort of specific sites for that we think there should be wind turbines, because that's a planning decision. That's not our job. But it does map areas that you've just seen that are potentially more suitable, in the same way that the Joint Local Plan evidence base did as well. So we wanted to get a sense check from you about levels of support for wind energy, any concerns, and are you happy that wind energy does have a role in renewable energy generation in South Oxfordshire? And then if not, if there were no wind turbines, we would need more solar. So how do we kind of reach that balance? Any thoughts on that would be great. And then the second set of questions was around what should we be telling the public about future energy systems, and how can we kind of reach new audiences around that? Increasingly, our team is working with the distribution network operators, so that's SSEN and UKPN, and also a new organisation called the National Energy Strategic Operator, to kind of proactively provide information about future energy needs. And we're also working with businesses to help them provide that information. There was a recent request for information, and there was this quite complicated spreadsheet, and we sat down with some businesses and worked through the spreadsheet and helped them fill it in for their energy needs. It's quite a technical thing, and most businesses in our districts don't have the in-house knowledge to be able to do that. So, but it's also very labour intensive for us, so we can't do it for everyone. But is there ways that we could maybe reach out to some more businesses that might need that support, or collectively try and support them rather than having to sit down individually with everyone? I don't know. It's quite a technical question, so there may not be any thoughts, but would welcome suggestions.
Great, thank you. Councillor Rawlins.
Couple of points. As far as wind and solar are concerned, there might be some conflicts, but might there not be an opportunity to co-locate them? And that would possibly be helpful in terms of connection into the grid and so forth as well. And if you've had a visual impact by putting a bloody great solar farm in place, then you might as well finish it off by sticking a wind farm there as well. I know there could be some slight conflicts there if you've tucked away the solar in a valley or something to keep it out of view. Then putting the wind there as well might counter that, or it might not have enough wind. But in principle, that seems to be a reasonable proposition, and I think we're just going to have to live with a certain amount of wind farm. We obviously don't want the entire countryside, especially the high value countryside, to be degraded by being covered in photovoltaics and bloody great windmills. But we've got to do something. We need this renewable energy. So my instinct is there. On the business side, I think we could probably model types of businesses. There are types of businesses that are very, very heavy users of energy, and we could we work with those individually and profile what they're likely to do. There'll be lots of other tiddly businesses with various characteristics, and I think we could sample and model what might happen with them, so that we can then view them as a group and forecast them accordingly. And I think that will, from my point of view, be accurate enough. I mean, we can be, part of my background as an accountant, we count beans, but sometimes the last bean doesn't count. It doesn't matter. It's actually the big picture that you're trying to get to. And so we mustn't be overly focused on excessive detail, that we want to get the big picture, because there's so many imponderables in what we're forecasting anyway, that we can't expect to be spot on. But if we're getting it roughly in the right neck of the woods, then we're probably going to be planning and doing the major steps that we should be doing, and get it near enough right to have been a good job.
Thank you. If we've got Denise, sorry, I don't quite see who that was there. That Councillor MacDonald.
Thank you for that. Just some thoughts that I think the role of wind energy does have a big place to play in renewable energy. I mean, the sun doesn't always shine, but then when it's not shining, it's usually windy. It does give a good return in terms of being quite efficient, and you do get quite a quick payback. I know the initial setup costs are quite expensive, but you do get quite a big payback quite quickly. And I think the only issues that people tend to have, again, as Lee's pointed out, it's quite unsightly. And you also have the sound as well. They can be quite noisy, so they can't really be near sort of anywhere where anybody lives closely. And also I guess the impact on wildlife as well, with the birds and bats and things, what have you. But I do feel it does. I know in other countries they have them quite a lot, and I guess there was always the thought that you could put them along motorways because people wouldn't mind if they were along motorways. But there's probably an issue there with kind of who owns the land, I suppose, and it might be quite disruptive to put them up. But I am all in favour of wind.
Thank you. Councillor Gordon-Creed, Ali.
Thank you. So I'm in favour of all sorts of renewable energy sources. The thing that I think is often missing, though, is the where. And we are currently absolutely in our area of South Oxfordshire under a huge threat from the planning bill coming through with regards to stripping the protections of green belt and turning things into grey belt, and building 1.5 million houses by the end of their term. And for me, I would make a strong plea for us not to just cave to the government's big infrastructure agenda with no account really, or very little account or choices for the people that are impacted. So so for me it would be about the bit that's been missing in this talk so far is the smaller scale element, whereby communities who want things get them. For example, all around Thame, there are lots of new commercial businesses there who are very willing to use their excess energy and put it into battery storage, which then gives cheaper electricity to the houses that are near them at night. And that smaller scale level, the farm, there are villages who want wind power. And so I would want a plea for us to not just kowtow to the government's big infrastructure scaling. And I know that's, there's a huge pressure on all of you to do that, but we could be pioneers of the smaller scale community-led energy options, which Cozy Homes are fantastic at fighting for successfully. And I think not putting that into the equation will do us a big disservice going forward, and putting it into the equation, I think we'll be pioneers. You know, I think we will get a lot of recognition for the care that we stick to in terms of what planning is meant to do, which is also take account of community, as well as the whole what fits with our what happened in our JLP with our consultations. You know, people want to be consulted. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. I think probably got a couple more questions, but it'd be nice to hear Dominic Lamb's take on how he feels about potential for onshore wind in South Oxfordshire. My own feelings are that the marvellous thing about wind turbines offshore is they are much larger, much more efficient, and work most of the time. Whereas onshore they have higher, or tend to have slightly higher ecological impacts and things like that. So, but I'd also like to understand the take on with businesses. Probably the nature of our businesses locally is that they get hammered by what are called high triad charges at certain times of the day, because everyone's coming back from school and things like that, and the grid starts to get under capacity, so they suddenly have to drop a lot of things. But one of the technologies that our area does lend itself to is the battery banks and things like that, which are tremendously useful in taking the capacity off the grid, as Councillor Rawlins has touched on. But I'll just leave that there, and we have Councillor Giles. Mike, question.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And it does sort of build on to what others have said, actually. I mean, I'm in favour of wind, but I mean, I think that the key question is around the storage point. I mean, as I understand it, some of the offshore wind generated is not even stored properly because we don't have the infrastructure in. So for me, it's almost putting the cart before the horse. What is the plan for storing the energy we actually have? Why can't we crack on with that? That would be my point. And I think, you know, talk about generation without the storage in place is a false approach, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm keen. I mean, I would love to have a battery on and solar on my house at the moment, but it's not quite feasible where I'm located. But certainly with you know, the microgeneration and off-gridding of domestic properties, that's something that would sit very well, I think, with our whole planning approach. But again, Councillor Cooper, sorry.
Do you want Heather to have her say? It might answer some of the points first.
Yeah, Heather, do you want to come in? Sorry, I hadn't seen.
Just a very brief comment. Councillor Gordon Creed's input was extremely valuable because we will have an opportunity in the LEAP to focus in on specific project ideas in specific communities and use them as examples that can then be rolled out. So anything that you wish to contribute that is geographically specific is extremely helpful, and we'll feed that in. So the comment about Tame and the businesses was ideal as something that could be expanded in the LEAP as a detailed example, project example. Thanks.
Right, so shall I continue now?
Yes, please.
Couple of points. One on the first thing on wind energy. I'm really not in a position to sort of say whether we should or shouldn't have it. I did go to a big wind energy presentation. Must have been about 10 years ago now. It was actually held on the edge of Bromley Marsh, where they've got a big wind farm near Rye, and people were worried about the noise. And we went and stood under the things, and they weren't really noisy at all. And certainly the sheep underneath didn't bat an eyelid. And a lot of people had lots of concerns about birds flying in them, and there's no evidence of any destruction of wildlife in the area at all. So in principle, yes, wind energy is a good idea. As far as Oxfordshire is concerned, I like the idea of putting them along the edge of, well, the M40 motorways, I was going to say, because you've often got and scope for either if the motorway is on a side of a slope, and quite a lot of them are sort of have south-facing slopes where you could have solar panels, and then at the top you put some wind turbines along. I don't know whether it's feasible or not, but it seems to me that putting them along motorways, as somebody's already suggested, you've already defaced the value of the landscape by sticking a great road through the middle. So you might as well have some solar panels and wind turbines as well. And then my other comment on the opposite end of the extreme, actually, I feel that as a council, we're much more in a position to do far more in the way of educating people to try and use less electricity. And this can range from bigger scale things like, well, to be specific, I got really quite annoyed when they upgraded Benson Parish Hall and everything's electrically operated, which is fine when it works and a complete pain when it doesn't, and the doors won't open and somebody's jammed them and the toilets won't flush because you have to have electricity for that. Why do we put electricity into these things when the mechanical or hand-operated things are more efficient, to be honest? So I think we need to look at our planning guidance on that for all new buildings. Retrofitting things is very difficult. But also, getting people to realise, if using those nice charts that we've got from the LEAP data to show people what what the problem is, and if you can somehow build in the fact that our energy usage is just going up and up and up at the moment, and it needs to be levelled off or controlled in some way, as well as trying to get things reduced in terms of emissions, to show people that active travel is really a much more sensible way of reducing our carbon footprint, and there are various other ways, like sort of you buying food that's locally produced rather than importing it from great distances away. But it's the sort of small scale personal things. It's maybe going against what Lee said in terms of looking at the big picture, but I think you've got to tackle these things from all angles, basically. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I think we've probably got more thoughts to come on this. So do we want to, so the next questions?
Shall I move on to the next questions? I'm very
please.
Running out of time, and but if anyone has any other thoughts, you're of course welcome to feed in afterwards as well. So we'll quickly run through these. Some of these are quite similar, and we've touched on them quite a lot already. So we obviously know there's a huge challenge to retrofitting all the homes in the districts, and it can be most cost effective, or more cost effective maybe, if it's delivered at scale or at a neighbourhood level. Do you know of any communities that might be interested or suitable for neighbourhood level retrofit schemes with sort of maybe like street level or like bulk buying of solar panels or things like that? We don't know whether we'd be able to support something like that, but it's something we're interested in looking into. It might be an area that's particularly high levels of interest, or with a lot of similar houses that might require lots of similar work, or an area of particular need. On a very similar vein, we talked about the large scale heat networks earlier, but we also know that some smaller villages in the district have previously looked at village scale heat networks and that kind of sort of feasibility of those. So again, if you're aware of any communities that might be looking into neighbourhood level heat networks, then we'd be interested to hear about those. And the final one is the public building decarbonisation theme. We as a council have already done a lot of work on our own buildings on this, and have plans in the pipeline to do more. But we are also keen to do more to support decarbonisation of community buildings. We already do quite a lot of this through our grant schemes and things like that, but if there are other ways we could support community buildings to transition to net zero energy systems or heating systems, then it'd be good to hear about that too. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, obviously, before we go into any questions, one of the most obvious areas to me for domestic retrofit and groups are the housing associations, because often they're dealing with similar housing stock and what have you. Many of these areas are actually private and publicly owned now, And so it would be interesting with that to see if you know, a package could be offered to private homeowners as well at the same time, so that they are, you know, not declaring interest there. I'd live on an estate that's part Soha and part private, but a lot of the houses are very similar. So if we see somebody do something clever with one of the houses, we think, oh, I'll copy that. So obviously there's a lot of learning and communities of practice that perhaps could be established there, I think. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's got any more comments on the other areas. Is anybody?
If not, I can move on to the final one.
Yeah, if you want to, that's probably the best, I think.
So
at the
this
moment,
is
but those
just
good.
Picking up the agriculture theme. So during the LEAP engagement activities so far, we have struggled to get representation from the agricultural sector. So we haven't had as much engagement as we would like. Our last question is, do you have any suggestions on who we can engage with to gain a better insight into the agricultural transition to net zero? Just to kind of clarify on this, we are looking only at energy, because this is the local area energy plan, rather than wider agricultural activities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So there are other parts of that, but yeah, any thoughts would be great.
I would just say that the Chilterns groups and the North Wessex Downs groups would be two areas that have good links with farming already. Councillor Giles, notice you got your hand up there, so Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I'll just declare an interest. I do work part-time in the cannabis industry, but growing industrial hemp, is incredibly good for soil and for crop yields and things like that. And James knows a lot about this as well. But also it can be used for homes. It can be used for energy, and it's actually better than net zero as well. It actually takes out more carbon from the atmosphere than it actually uses, even in the growing and development stage. So I think it's actually speaking to house builders and explaining to them about the value of things like hemp. I'm sure there are alternatives as well, but that to me is an obvious way to decarbonize construction and use it as an energy resource.
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely one to look at. Dominic.
I just wanted to come in briefly because I'm aware of the time which is moving on. And I was going to suggest that what we can do is share these questions with members of CEEAC afterwards and give you a few days perhaps to come back to us with your thoughts. That said,
that sounds wise, because I do appreciate time is marching on.
It'd be great to hear from Councillor Norman and his perspective as a farmer on this particular one. Yeah. So before we cut anybody off, thank you.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, well, only I don't have much to say. Who did you try to engage with in terms of agricultural groups? So, I mean, what I could suggest is that there are the Nettlebed District Farming Club, which covers much of South, if not all of South Oxfordshire, and then there are these farming clusters, which are very useful vehicles, I think, for these kind of discussions. Possibly. Who did you try to engage with?
We have approached the farmer clusters, but I don't know whether we've necessarily had the right contact information, and maybe it's not been the right. We haven't tried in the right way. So if you have don't share them right now. But like if you have particular people we should be talking to, who would be the right person and might be interested, then that would be great.
Yes. No. Well, I certainly do have those sort of contacts and so on.
Thank you.
Great. Absolutely. Thank you for that. I think probably need to go on to final presentation item, Dominic. That is on nature, which is probably quite timely actually. Nature-based carbon sequestration, after a comment on hemp and how it's better than net zero. So can I hand over the floor to you? Dominic, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I was talking to myself there for a while. Sorry. Yes. So I don't want to delay your evenings unnecessarily. So I'm going to canter through the slides we've got here, but you'll be aware I think this committee's been talking about how we might go about offsetting our residual carbon emissions as a council for some time, and there have been discussions both in this committee and in cabinet meetings in the past about how we might achieve that. And that, in part, is what's actually led to the project I'm about to present to you today, where we set up this project to start looking at how we might capture the benefits that natural habitats bringing in sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. So I'm just going to move through the presentation now, if it will allow me. There we go. So just to start off, all of the Oxfordshire authorities have a target date of being net zero in their own operations by 2030. So we're all sort of aligned in that perspective. And like in South Oxfordshire, where we've agreed that whilst we may well have to invest in carbon offsetting in order to reach our goals, once we've sort of reduced our own carbon outputs as low as we can, what we really want to do is to ensure that that investment is made locally within our own districts, ideally, if not within Oxfordshire, and that it enables significant co-benefits like the development of new natural habitats or other co-benefits. Now, at the same time, nationally, all local authorities are having to develop local nature recovery strategies. And what we know from what DEFRA have told us and the government have told us is that there is going to be no new magic pot of money, which is going to allow us to deliver all of the activities in the local nature recovery strategy. So they're expecting local nature recovery strategy groups to actually look at how new forms of green finance that might be brought into the market to help to deliver some of the new areas of nature recovery. And so this sort of thinking, which was at least, as I say, part formed by CEEAC's input some time ago, led to a formation of a partnership between the 4 district councils in Oxfordshire, so it's South and Vale with West Oxfordshire and Cherwell, and the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership. And we made a successful application to Innovate UK to investigate these issues further. Okay, so what did we set out to achieve? Well, the current methods of estimating how much carbon natural habitats can sequester from the environment and the current mechanisms that are available. So this is something we needed to understand more about the current ways that are used to estimate the amount of carbon that different habitats can sequester or store up within them over time, and think about some of the existing mechanisms. So you may have heard of the Woodland Carbon Code, and there is also a peatland carbon code. Now, clearly there is very little, if any, peatland in South Oxfordshire or indeed in Oxfordshire, so there's little opportunity for that. So the first question we wanted to look at was, well, what are the various different mechanisms for to measure the carbon sequestration potential of developing different habitats, and what are the current mechanisms that are used to market those? So the second area we wanted to look at was really to how, can we develop something which is of high integrity? Carbon offsetting is beset by allegations of greenwashing, and a lot of the international carbon schemes are, let's say, dubious in some instances, and their benefits are not always obvious, and sometimes the benefits in one area have quite negative impacts elsewhere. So we wanted to make sure that anything we do in Oxfordshire is essentially part of a high integrity approach that ensures that all of the right things happen. We also wanted to understand what a carbon market might look like in Oxfordshire and what mechanisms we might use to set up the market base for nature place carbon in Oxfordshire. And the answer to these 3 sort of key questions that we posed have been pulled together in 3 different reports. The first, looking at the carbon methodologies and how we might get those to market. The second, looking at the sort of possibility of developing a high integrity marketplace, and then finally actually how that marketplace might be implemented within Oxfordshire. And then all of that's brought together in a sort of an overall report which summarises the findings of these 3 research reports. So all of these research reports and the summary report are available now on the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership website. So the project actually finished at the end of November. So these are very much hot off the press if anybody's interested. Okay, so in order to inform these 3 main reports, we also commissioned a number of other pieces of consultancy work to help us understand some of the key questions. And again, the questions we wanted to answer were, well, what is the current and future demand for nature-based carbon in the county? So, you know, who actually wants to buy carbon credits and who might buy carbon credits that are derived from the development of new natural habitats? And on the supply side, so we wanted to understand what farmers and landowners thought about this. So what are they interested in getting involved in this market? Do they see it as a new potential form of income to help them balance the books on their landownings? And then finally, we wanted to look at the supply of carbon from habitats which have been identified as priorities within the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. And this resulted in 3 reports. The first one by a company called CEEAC, who are commissioned to help us understand what a nature-based carbon market might look like. And this was about the demand side. So what businesses and others might, you know, what would they be prepared to pay for? So they spent a lot of time trying to engage with both the big business and smaller and medium-scale enterprises in the county. We commissioned Forum for the Future to look at the supply side and talk to landowners, farmers and landowners to understand, you know, what would encourage them to get involved in a market which was essentially selling carbon generated on their land. What were the challenges that they faced in entering a market like this, and what would they prioritise? And then the final report was commissioned from the Leverhulme Centre for Nature Recovery, which is part of Oxford University. And they were commissioned to quantify and map the carbon sequestration potential of the habitats which are proposed in the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. Now, in addition to these sort of theoretical research reports, we actually wanted the project to have a real world application as well, and to actually do something to try and help stimulate these carbon markets. And that enabled us to invest in 2 projects. And the first was we part funded a study which is being developed by the North East Cotswolds Farmer Cluster. So Councillor Norman mentioned the various farmer clusters which are developing around the county, and there are several in Oxford, or quite a few now in Oxfordshire, but the North East Cotswolds Farmer Cluster are really leading the way nationally and demonstrating new ways of helping to raise income for farmers when farmers club together to do different things. So this study really enabled them to map out opportunities to do natural flood management schemes on farms. So this is to reduce the flooding, primarily in Oxford, but also downstream settlements. Now, those projects have a great opportunity also to sequester carbon, and it may be possible to sell carbon credits for those schemes, as well as to encourage biodiversity. The second piece of work we funded was at a site called Burney Hill Community Woodland, and Nicholson's were appointed in this case to undertake a baseline ecological study of the woodland to estimate the carbon sequestration potential of that woodland. And we hope that this will allow the site owners to make further investment decisions on the development of the area, which could tie with the emerging carbon markets and potentially also biodiversity net gain markets. So the project was funded by innovation funding. Now, innovation funding, by the nature of it, is new. It doesn't always work out. So we did have some bumps along the way. There are a number of challenges that we faced. Firstly, it was to do with the evidence. Now, there is a wealth of literature out there about carbon sequestration potential of different habitats. And equally, there are a wealth of different environmental variables which affect the rate at which different habitats will sequester carbon. The soils, the rainfall, the type of management, the slope, everything else will impact on this. What we learned from this is that actually it makes it quite difficult to draw conclusions about certain types of habitat, on average sequestering certain amounts of carbon. It's been done for woodlands, it's been done for carbon, arguably because they're probably the simplest habitats to do it for. But actually, there's still a lot of research that's needed to quantify the carbon sequestration habitats of, the carbon sequestration potential of a lot of habitats. Sort of talking to a similar point we had in the local area energy planning section, we found that the engagement with suppliers, which in this case it's our landowners, the farmers and landowners, was quite challenging. Now, I think that there are some reasons for that. There's been a lot of significant policy changes and flip-flopping in our government of late. And frankly, I think quite a lot of landowners are a bit sort of fed up with all of these constant suggestion that they should be doing things differently. And I think there's a sort of an element of sort of sit and wait. And that was definitely a challenge to us in trying to sort of engage with those particular groups. And we yes, in this case, we did have good connections with a lot of the existing farmer clusters and others. An added complication to this is that farmers and landowners are being pushed to also demonstrate that they're delivering net zero in their own operations, so in their farming operations. So their customers, the supermarkets and others, have their own ambitions to be net zero. So quite often we found in talking to landowners, those landowners are actually using any carbon credits generated on their land holdings to demonstrate their own credibility in this market, and therefore that reduces the amount of carbon that's available for the wider market. And potential engagement with buyers equally was difficult. There are a few sort of larger and medium scale businesses in South Oxfordshire, but there are a lot more sort of the very small and medium scale enterprises. And the main barrier that we came across there is that there is a lack of a push factor in the carbon market. So people aren't required to demonstrate net zero. They're not required to buy carbon credits, unlike the biodiversity net gain market now, where developers are required to demonstrate that they can achieve a 10% uplift in biodiversity. There's no similar push factor for carbon. And so the buyers so those potential buyers in businesses and so on, maybe that demand just isn't quite there at the moment. Okay. And finally, the current price of carbon is actually simply too low to enable a lot of these projects to go ahead. At the moment, it's around about £50 a tonne. This isn't high enough to make projects viable. There are a lot of upfront costs associated with these things, and the new habitats, the projects have to be delivered before the benefits are realised, before any profit is made by a farmer. So that price per tonne of carbon needs to come up significantly to encourage people to engage in this market. So that was some of the barriers, but what did we achieve? Well, I think that first and foremost, the projects significantly increased our understanding of the challenges that face the carbon market and the challenges that we will need to address to take this forward in the future. And that has really raised the sort of recognition of the potential for selling carbon-based market with both our suppliers and with our with potential buyers. We also have a much better understanding of how areas like the areas identified in the local nature recovery strategy might be a focus for developing these new carbon markets as a way of bringing new finance into these areas to help deliver some of the outputs that we're looking to achieve for the local nature recovery strategy. We've actually, through the project, managed to estimate and map the carbon sequestration potential of the measures that are proposed within the Oxfordshire Local Nature Recovery Strategy. So we have a tool that we can go to landowners in that area with to help to talk to them, to engage with them and encourage them to perhaps think about engaging in some of these markets. Now, the insights gained by this project have also helped inform the development of a county-based solution called the Oxfordshire Nature Recovery Fund. So this is a revolving fund which has been administered by the Trust for Oxfordshire's Environment. It's designed to help landowners by providing finance to help cover some of the very high upfront costs of getting involved in these new markets, and they only have to pay back this funding once they actually start to realise some of the benefits of the work that it will enable. One of the aims of the project was to try and make sure that whatever we did, it aimed at sort of a high integrity marketplace. So we have developed a set of high integrity principles for an Oxfordshire carbon market, and we're looking to develop that further by marketing projects through the local nature partnerships nature mark scheme. So the nature mark scheme was set up for biodiversity net gain projects, and it was a way of highlighting the biodiversity net gain schemes that were sort of high integrity schemes, that they've been checked, they've been verified. We know that they're delivering good biodiversity. There is a lot of concern in the biodiversity net gain market about projects which are just targeting really low, relatively low value habitats that aren't being maintained properly. So this is a way of trying to overcome that problem. We've also developed the concept of a single farm carbon payment. So lots of farms could look at various different things to pull together to add to a carbon market. So you might be able to do a little bit of woodland here, you might be able to sell some soil carbon somewhere else, and you might even think about the sort of emerging potential for selling carbon in the hedgerow carbon code. Now, at the moment, if a farmer or landowner wanted to do that, they would have to go to 3 separate schemes in order to do that, and that's just not viable. So what we're looking to do is to pull together a process that will allow farmers to engage a sort of a single transaction to overcome all of those problems. I've talked about the sort of engagement and awareness raising already. And the final thing we've looked at is that there is definitely a potential to develop a voluntary market with a coalition of the willing. So we know that there are, from our engagement so far, that there are certain buyers, so people who want to buy carbon credits in the county. We also know that there are landowners and suppliers who are quite keen to engage in this market. So whilst it might not be fully formed at the moment, it's possible to bring together those two sides to actually make something happen as a sort of an initial sort of pilot market to see if we can get things working. And as I've already said, investment made by the project has helped to stimulate the supply of nature-based solutions in Cherwell and Burney Hill community woodland. So what next? Well, all of the partners that are currently involved in the project and a number of others have committed to continue working in this area, because we see it as being an important way of helping organisations like South Oxfordshire District Council reach our net zero targets by enabling us to invest ultimately in high quality verified carbon credits, but also as a way of delivering nature recovery in our area. And we'd like to put this forward as sort of a national exemplar. South Oxfordshire and the Vale led the way in developing biodiversity net gain projects, and we want to do the same with the carbon market. The County Council's climate team have actually agreed to invest in the project to take it forward from here, and they're part funding the employment of a green finance project development manager to take some of these ideas forward into the future. We want to go ahead and test this idea of a coalition of the willing as a key mechanism for sort of instigating that market for nature-based solutions. And we want to sort of base the initial market implementation on some of the existing and tested carbon codes. So that's primarily currently the woodland carbon code, but there are new codes developing all the time and a lot of work going on in this area. So nationally, there's a lot of sort of heat generated by this idea. So we know that there is a hedgerow carbon code in the wings. The soil carbon code is coming along. Wilder Carbon's attempt by the Wildlife Trust to capture the sort of carbon benefits from a wide range of different habitats, and we'd like to introduce those as they become further established. And we want to work closely with the ZCOP, or the Zero Carbon Oxfordshire Partnership, to look at ways we might be able to aggregate the demand. So we've talked about aggregating the supply of carbon on farms, but this is actually about the demand side as well. So could we pull together demand from a number of different companies or organisations or local authorities, indeed, to help unlock sort of these schemes? Just a couple more points to go. So we also want to explore ways of packaging sequestration projects with other ecosystem services. So I said to you earlier that the current price of carbon is far too low to make projects viable. So what we know is from other schemes that have gone ahead is that sometimes if those are packaged up with other ecosystem services like natural flood management, like employee volunteering schemes, like all sorts of other things, you can then start to put together a package which starts to interest sort of larger institutional investors who might be interested in this. And in the medium term, we want to look for the potential to set up a land function exchange. So this is where you would set up a sort of a marketplace which would allow the transaction of a wide range of different ecosystem services under the same banner. Oops, I've gone backwards. I've already mentioned the Oxfordshire Nature Mark, and again, we'd like to extend this to the carbon markets as well. And then finally, and not least, I mentioned the North East Cotswolds Farmer Cluster as being a sort of a national exemplar currently of a landscape-led approach where bringing farmers together to market a whole variety of different services that might sell from their land is really beginning to work. Now we have a similar farmer cluster, the Ock and Tame farmer cluster in our area, which covers quite a large part of the sort of lowland parts of South Oxfordshire. They're also working at a landscape recovery scheme, which will look to do these things. And we want to help work with other farmer clusters to help take these ideas further and develop them further into the future. And finally, so all of the information I've just cantered through very quickly is available on the Oxfordshire Local Nature Partnership website, and we will be sharing these slides with the minutes. So you'll be able to pick up this link from the minutes. And that's all from my presentation. So I'm open to any questions as long as you can bear to hang around. Thank you.
Thank you, Dominic. That was really good and really interesting. And I'm sort of already thinking about how we get our solar farms to sequester carbon. And I know that's an area that I sometimes look at them and go, by depriving the soil of light, are you actually giving out carbon, or are you actually sequestering it? So there's lots of things there, and absolutely agree that they should cross over as much as possible, I think. And yeah, the cumulative benefits are probably what will win it, because there isn't enough in some single schemes to do that. So just to have a look on questions, Councillor Rawlins.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, fantastic piece of work, Dominic. Thank you. That was really, really good. I hope, as you're saying, as an exemplar, I'd hope that we can go in with that as we gather it together into some of the government agencies, DEFRA, Energy, MHCLG, and try to get them to think together and to see the links between all the different pieces that are required. I'm not surprised that some of the farmers are a bit grumpy about some of the subsidy schemes and so forth, that they were promised one thing and they're looking at something that looks very different, promises to be climate and nature friendly, but I think for some of them they're finding it quite difficult. I wondered with this how much we're looking at using other people's land, which I have a slight worry about in terms of how far we're able to protect that and put agreements in place so that the investments we make will be retained and not just taken out. When I look at things like BNG, I think if we're trying to create environments which are habitat rich and which support perhaps wildlife corridors and stuff, then inevitably we're likely, I would think, to be doing some things and planting some things that would actually have a carbon sequestration benefit on the way by. And I know you're saying 50 quid a tonne isn't getting us anywhere. I don't know offhand what sort of price per tonne you would think would be starting to tickle the dial, but clearly 50 is not enough. I mean, is it 200 or is it 1,000 or something?
I mean, there are examples of schemes which have been agreed recently. These are the sort of outliers at the moment, so this isn't the sort of the norm. But there are schemes in Oxfordshire selling at, I think, 125, 150 pound a tonne at the moment. Now that in those instances, so they're not just selling the carbon sequestration benefits of the work they're doing. So they are creating habitats which create an uplift in biodiversity, but also sequester carbon. So they're selling that carbon sequestration benefits, but they're also in those instances sort of meeting a number of the environmental and social responsibility goals of those big institutional investors. So, for example, I think one of the schemes I'm aware of, that the landowner is also sort of engaged in employee volunteering program with that particular company. So they're sort of selling other things on top of that. But I mean, the price of carbon in these schemes has been quite low for quite some time now, and that has really held back the market developing, along with some of the other sort of barriers I mentioned. And it really does need to be up in that £150 area or higher. I mean, clearly, the higher the price is, the more attractive it will be for farmers and other landowners to get engaged in it.
I went to a pensions training session organised through OCC, and I think it was a Northeast Cotswolds thing that was being pitched to us. Certainly, it was Savills and all that. Interesting exemplar that. I wonder within this, the government are doing lots of things that I'm not very keen on, like saying possibly BNG won't apply to developments of less than 50 homes and all that sort of nonsense, but that they would be required to make a contribution. Can we see in the project, in what we're putting together here, investment and money coming from other areas outside Oxfordshire, where for one reason or another they're not well placed to offer this? I mean, I hate in a way that that's being done and taken out of those developments, and that the last damn tree is going to be ripped off the site. But if that's how it's going to be, I wonder whether we wouldn't represent quite a good repository if there's funds looking for a home in that regard. And one last thought that had occurred to me in some of the, if we are doing it on farmers' farmland, whether we could link up with other things that we've been thinking about, like tourism and like locally sourcing food and trying to reduce the food miles, and recognising restaurants and economic units within our area who choose to source locally from authenticated sources, that we could maybe join up some of these things. And try to, as you're saying, there's lots of things that we can perhaps link together and make interesting. And it would be good as part of an exemplar, perhaps. But anyway, very, very fascinating and interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, lots of points there, Lee. Thank you. I mean, just taking the point about whether we might encourage investment in from elsewhere. So because we were an early adopter of BND and a bit of a pioneer, we started this voluntary market before it became mandatory. Actually, we've now got habitat banks developed in South Oxfordshire and in the Vale of Whitehorse, which are receiving credits from all over. So we are benefiting because we were early adopters of these processes. So what we're looking to do here is to replicate that, and frankly, it's about providing new potential sources of income to farmers to support their livelihoods and their businesses as well. So we're looking to replicate that, benefit the farming community, allow people to claim net zero, and at the same time deliver some of the elements of nature recovery and bring some of this new green finance into the market.
Would you benefit, Dominic, from council funding and capital funding and all the rest of it to try and set up some of those exemplars, to try and get money into them ahead of some of the rest of these pieces coming together?
I mean, yes, clearly we would need a budgetary mandate to do that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, as projects develop, those are the sort of things we'll be looking at, probably with a new authority rather than with the current setup, given the restrictions we have. But yes, that's exactly the sort of thing we'll be looking to pull in.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, thanks very much. Councillor Gordon-Creed, do you have a question?
Yes. I just wanted to say thank you to Dom for that incredibly cohesive and brilliant, overview of what you guys have been up to, and I feel like it would really tie in with the idea of the wildlife corridors and CMIs to provide funding. But I just did want to add in a piece that I think gets ignored with existing sites. So, for example, I managed just because of being feet on the ground and knowing tow people, Trust for Oxfordshire people, as well as Natural England people, because Natural England, as a carbon sequestration potential, is very high, and they fall into the gap of being SSIs existing already, blah blah blah. So they don't get fed into the loop. But because I know the reserve next door very well, we managed to identify some areas of non-SSI that could receive a grant from TOW to create new habitat, open chalkland, which is one of the best carbon sequestration things going. And so potentially what I would say is just add them into the conversation for potential carbon credits, because they need all the bloody money they can get, because the government's at war with them and has been for 10 plus years. But we managed to do that. And so I would just say put them into the conversation if as and when appropriate, because we managed to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in saying so. SSIs and designated sites, it's very difficult to get biodiversity uplift, so they don't have the advantage of BNG. Similarly with carbon benefits, because of those habitats are generally speaking already mature, so they're not going to sequester any additional carbon. So you kind of have to look over the fence. So if Natural England are a landowner that own other low value land that they're not doing anything with, then potentially they could engage in the market. I'm not aware that they own a huge amount of that. In fact, I'm not aware that they own a great deal of land, full stop, actually. I know they own some national nature reserves, but certainly not low grade land.
Yeah, no, they don't. But it's on their agenda.
Yeah.
The other thing that I wondered if we could somehow get into our system, because currently there seems to be this loophole in planning applications whereby the developers go in and clear a site, so they remove so that they have a lower BNG metric to achieve, and no one seems to question. It happens before the application.
I think that's actually an urban myth, Ali, unless you've actually seen it in reality. So there is a fail safe in the BNG regulations. So if a developer does that and it's clear and obvious, you have to take an assumption about the value of that habitat, and that assumption has to be quite optimistic. So it would actually completely penalise them to do that. So I think developers who are doing that are not particularly clued up on what the regulations say. So there's a very specific circumstance you mentioned there, but I know in instances where developers have tried that, the planning authority is allowed to take that habitat as if it was what was there before, and that habitat was in good quality. So they then end up paying twice for the damage they've caused. So it's not generally a big thing. I know there's a lot of talk about this. I think there's a degree of misunderstanding. Actually, I don't think it happens anywhere near as often as people think it does.
I'm not sure the rest of the people who sit on planning on this talk would agree, because we see it regularly, but hopefully that'll change.
Yeah, I'm just supporting Ali on that. We see cases of this. I don't know, Dominic, whether the outcome is that the officer takes that into account when they do the BNG. I'm not aware of that, but we're certainly seeing cases. I mean, I can think of two straight off where the site has been cleared of known habitat prior to making a planning application. So it's certainly happening.
Yeah, and what should be happening, I mean, I don't know obviously about those particular cases, but is that the planning officer and the ecological advisors would take that view, and they would be penalised through the process. So I don't know whether that's happened in these cases or not.
No, and by then we've lost the actual habitat. Too late.
Anyway, I think we've strayed quite away from natural carbon sequestration, so maybe that's time to draw to a close.
I believe so. I think that's a nice time. Councillor Gordon-Creed, I think we've touched on most of the areas you raised in your note beforehand. So I'm just saying, is there any other business?
The only other thing that, again, I would ask, again, this is just personal experience, and this is it may not be the remit of this, but most builders and contractors don't know about what alternatives are out there. And I just wondered if South Oxfordshire could provide a kind of, when an application comes in, could we provide a list of things like hemp scan? Because I was just looking at it, and this is a building material. It's phenomenal. My builders have no idea what alternatives there are to good insulation, and without being pointed. Anyway, that's just a thought.
Okay, absolutely. Lee, another question?
Well, the final agenda item was future items, and I had a little list here. But I mean, the first item on my agenda would be frequency of meeting, and how frequently. This year we've done 2. I think hopefully in future at least 3 and maybe 4 would be more appropriate. And we certainly haven't failed to fill the space productively tonight. And I think there's more that we could do. I mean, I scribbled down the usual suspect. We talked about towns and parishes and what we can do with them and what we can do to encourage more through them. We've talked about flooding, we've talked about trees, we've talked about landscape. We have talked a bit about habitats and movement corridors tonight. And our old favourite, we have talked a bit about tonight, farmers and what can happen there. And we've heard some of the barriers that there might be, because they're not necessarily overly impressed with some of the things that have happened to them via subsidies and so on since Brexit. So. But that was a rattle list of things that maybe we can find space to talk about in future.
I think so. One of the things to mention for the future is, and it's at early stages, but in common with other meetings with Vale, we're looking potentially at a joint CEEAC, which could give us more time, and certainly would make best use of officers' time. I think would be the key area there, because at the moment they're currently reiterating lots of stuff and asking the same questions twice. Also, to go on with what Councillor Gordon-Creed said, it would give us a bigger potentially landscape area, and hopefully if we do move towards the Ridgeway model, as is my preference and the voted preference of this council, it would give us a bigger area to work with, and hopefully something transitional rather than a hard stop and a new start with a new authority in a couple of years. And I think that's a political couple of years. It's a bit like saying Thursday, but don't tell them which Thursday, isn't it? So that would be really useful. So I think that's everything for today. Can I thank our officers very, very much for their time and attention. It is always greatly appreciated, and is definitely after working hours for you guys. So thank you very, very much for that. That is, as my wife's train was delayed, that looks like it's an elegant time to stop as well, and I'll be able to give her a lift from the station.
Okay.
So thank you all very, very much, and we'll draw the meeting to a close there. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Bye for now.
Cheers.
Bye.
Right. Bye. Bye.
Bertie, can you stop the broadcast, please?